Election Day is 45 days away, but early voting has already started in several states, with Maryland, New Jersey, and Oklahoma joining the list today. It'll get underway in Georgia in less than 3 weeks. But that state's MAGA-controlled election board, a creature of the voter suppression law enacted by the Republican-controlled state government after President Biden won the state in 2020, is doing everything it can to gum up the works even after votes have been cast in the Peach State. Under a new rule passed yesterday, all of Georgia's votes cast on Election Day will now have to be hand-counted. How bad is this decision? So bad that both Georgia's Republican Attorney General and Republican Secretary of State have slammed it. And voting rights advocates are warning that Georgia could end up missing the December 25th deadline for electoral votes to be received by the president of the Senate and the archivist. Certification of those results will be January 6th. As Ari Berman writes in Mother Jones, quote, even if the election results are ultimately certified, any kind of dispute or delay in counting votes could be weaponized by Trump and his allies to disastrous effect. Joining me now, Ari Berman, national voting rights correspondent for Mother Jones. He's the author of Minority Rule, the right-wing attack on the will of the people and the fight to resist it. Ari, thank you very much for coming to the Saturday show. So walk us through how could delaying the results in Georgia hand the presidency to Trump?
Well, hey, Jonathan, great to see you again. So what would happen is that Georgia would not certify its electoral college votes in time. No candidate would get a majority in the electoral college as a result. And that would then throw the election to the House of Representatives, which has not happened since 1824. And then what would happen is the House would vote, but it wouldn't be a majority of members of the House voting. It would be a majority of state delegations where Republicans would have an advantage. And that's really the nightmare scenario here is you could have a presidential candidate who loses the popular vote, who does not win a majority of the Electoral College, but who could then be selected by House Republicans who don't even represent a majority of that body. And it might be a far-fetched scenario, but under the Constitution, it is a possible one.
Right. It is a possible one. If I learned anything after 4 years of Donald Trump in the White House is if you can imagine it, it could possibly happen. So everyone needs to keep their imaginations open and broad. You know, the Georgia Attorney General and Secretary of State say they don't think the election board's decision can stand up to legal challenge. What do you make of that? Could this be over? Could this decision, but also a raft of their other decisions, be overturned?
Yes, I think it could very likely be blocked in Georgia law because listen, when the Republican Secretary of State weighs in ahead of time against these kind of claims, you know how serious it is. There have been a series of changes passed by the MAGA Georgia State Board of Election now, not just hand counting ballots, but saying that counties can undertake a reasonable inquiry before certifying elections without specifying what that inquiry is, allowing them access to all election related documentation. And it feels like Georgia Republicans are laying the groundwork not to certify the election if a Democrat wins and trying to make certification optional as opposed to mandatory. So they're really redefining what Georgia law requires. And I think that's going to put them in a difficult position with the courts. But what Trump is trying to do is just create chaos and uncertainty here so he can weaponize it, just like he tried to weaponize any kind of delay in counting the ballots or any kind of process that takes a little bit longer in counting the ballots in 2020. Ironically, the new hand counting rule is going to do exactly that. It's going to make it longer to count ballots, and then Trump's going to turn around and say, hey, there's something wrong because it's taking longer to count ballots, even though his side pushed for those rules.
Let me get you on one more thing before we have to let you go in 30 seconds. Nebraska. And Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina going to Nebraska and with at the urging also of Donald Trump, calling on Nebraska to go to a winner-take-all format for its electoral votes, because in Nebraska there's that one district where the electoral vote can go another way. Real quickly, Tell us why what they're trying to do is equally important to pay attention to.
Well, it's so concerning because if that one Nebraska vote goes to Trump instead, the election could be tied 269 to 269 if Harris wins those blue wall states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. That could also throw the election to the House. So the Electoral College already systematically benefits Republicans, and now they're trying to rig it further for the GOP. And this is just yet another example of them trying to rig the rules at the 11th hour and upend Democratic norms when it feels like their side's not winning fair and square.
Ari Berman, you are the expert, so I thank you very much, as always, for bringing your expertise to the Saturday Show. Thank you.
Great to see you again, Jonathan. Thank you.